Welcome to episode 3 of Turning the Goldfields Green. Today we're presenting live from Main FM in Castlemaine, and our topic is transition towns, and I have Mary Blain and Ian Lillington here to chat about it. Today is the public holiday for Australia Day, or Invasion Day, as you may prefer to say, and so that's why we're live in the studio, because normally I wouldn't be able to make it in. So every episode I do an acknowledgement of country, and today more than ever I'd like to acknowledge that the studio we're presenting from was built on Aboriginal land, never ceded by the Dja Dja Wurrung people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and also recognise that the Indigenous knowledge of how to care for and coexist with this land is far more extensive than our own, and we have so much to learn.
Salt of the earth. Salt. Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change. Saltgrass.
Listen to all episodes of Turning the Goldfields Green on saltgrass.podbean.com. Turning the Goldfields Green is a Saltgrass production. It is hosted and produced by me, Alison Hanley, in partnership with the Mount Alexander Sustainability Group, MASG, and Main FM. All right, before we get started on our topic today, I would like to talk about recycling. I've been having a segment on each episode about how to recycle particular things, and last week I spoke about sneakers. But this week, oh my goodness, it isn't just one particular item I need to talk about, it's everything. How the frick are you supposed to recycle that? All right, so I think most people know that in our Shire of Mount Alexander, we have had a recycling crisis recently. The yellow-lidded bins have been going to landfill because our recycler, Veolia, is not able to process the commingled recycling. So we've been told to take sorted recycling to the local landfill, or just hold on to our recycling until the problem's sorted out. And we have been informed very recently that Veolia will be taking our commingled recycles, so the yellow-lidded bins, they'll be taking them again and taking them to their processing centre. So things will be recycled again as of the 17th of February, which is quite recent news. The reason for it was that the Visi plant, which Veolia took most of the cardboard and paper products to, was affected by the bushfires. And so they weren't able to take any more cardboard or paper products from Veolia, and that meant that sort of made the recycling process too difficult for Veolia to manage. So they've obviously sorted that out somehow, and as of the 17th of Feb, we'll be able to get our recycling picked up again, which is still another couple of weeks, at least 2 weeks, isn't it? 3 weeks maybe. So with Mary and Ian in the room, who are actually here to talk about transition towns, I thought we could have a quick chat about recycling first. Mary is a committee member of the Mount Alexander Sustainability Group, MASG, and Ian is a permaculture, I want to say guru, but maybe you don't like that word. He is a local guru, but he has been teaching permaculture around here for a long time, and many people will have done the course with him. And you've been a fan of the transition towns movement for a long time, and one of the things they do talk about in that is recycling, because I know that it's great to recycle stuff, but it's also better not to consume as much in the first place, or not to rely on recycling as sort of like this get out of jail free card for our consumption habits. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mary and I are both on the same page in terms of you should refuse or avoid it in the first place.
Yeah.
And originally there was this mantra of reduce, refuse, recycle, and the teacher in me does like the 3 parts because people remember 3s, but then it got extended out to repair and refuse, and so 5, repair and refuse, or reduce, reuse. But whatever number you have, recycle is at the end. Recycling is the last thing. It's the last okay option before trashing it. So there's so many ways to not get the problem in the first place, or to deal with it better if you have got it.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think there's quite a big move at the moment to do this zero waste sort of challenge, and I believe that the gold star for that is to have your year's worth of waste in a jar. And I try really hard, and can't imagine ever being able to get all my waste down to a glass jar. But I suppose the whole point is that it's raising awareness, and awareness is what's really needed in this area, because we just so unthinkingly, mindlessly do stuff out of habit. And really it's all about pausing, being willing to change our habits, but sometimes you just don't know quite how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's where, reading, talking to other people, looking around, you can get some good ideas about maybe how you can reduce your waste.
And more people are striving for a very reduced waste lifestyle, if not zero waste. And there's more and more people talking about it online. So you can find blogs and vlogs, all sorts of things.
And I would underscore what Bill said last week, which is keep the organics out of your other waste.
Yeah.
And even if you can do nothing else, just finding some way, where it might be a bokashi bin, it might be compost, it might simply be burying it in the garden. Like small amounts of kitchen waste can be buried about a foot deep, and the worms will deal with them. So there's 1,000 different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
But if that organic waste doesn't go to the tip or the recycling, it's a huge benefit.
Yeah, and your paper waste, a lot of the cardboard and paper can go into your compost as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So don't forget that.
The shredder is my, wonderful item,
Best friend.
piece of equipment I wouldn't get rid of, because everything from paper bags and stuff from the office, everything goes into the shredder, and the worms love it.
That's great. And the other thing to keep in mind is that as good as recycling is, it uses energy and resources and water to reprocess all of these things and make them again into a product. So it is better to refuse or reduce before you recycle, definitely. So transition towns is an idea that's been going around for just over 10 years. Rob Hopkins was a permaculture designer, and he set his students a project to create an energy descent action plan in 2004. That is, a plan to phase out resilience of fossil fuels in their town, which was Kinsale in Ireland. And two of his students, Louise Rooney and Catherine Dunn, developed the transition towns concept. Rob Hopkins then moved back to his hometown of Totnes in England in 2006, and he and Naresh Giangrande developed the ideas further into the transitional model. Now, what I like about that, Ian, is that it was a permaculture designer, and he set his students a challenge, and they came up with this brilliant idea, which has now gone global. And you are a permaculture designer and teacher. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's great, and it's one of many ways that permaculture is manifested, because permaculture starts off really as ethics and principles. And although it's often seen as gardens, permaculture design, if you use those principles, it can be applied to anything. So Rob said to his students, let's apply these principles to our energy system, because 10, 15 years ago it was already clear that our fossil fuel energy system was showing a lot of cracks. Even geologists from big oil companies were saying we're going to run out of oil. So sometime a few years ago, we already passed the halfway mark with conventional oil. And reasonably enough, the scientists and the geologists were saying, look, if you've used up half of your fuel tank and you're halfway to the destination, you might make it to the destination, but when you get there, you're going to need a new supply. So transition came from that logic, really, as to say things are changing. We might as well get used to it. Let's engage with that change and embrace that change.
I read that was one of their key, they've got 6 perhaps key sort of concepts embedded in it. And psychology is one of them, which is taking the fossil fuel-free future as an opportunity to thrive rather than a challenge that is too great to hurdle.
Yeah, and the original book from 2007 or 8 is written in terms of head, heart and hands, which of course is borrowed somewhat from Steiner. And some people want to add, a spiritual dimension in as well. But I'm like reuse, reduce, recycle. I like the three. I like the head, heart, hands.
Yeah.
And you can weave as much spirituality in whatever way you want into that. But sure, there is a psychology. There's the way our brains work, the way we feel about stuff is so central to both permaculture and transition, because you can have a great plan to grow some veggies or make some compost, but if your brain or some part of your psyche is stopping you getting out of bed or stopping you getting into the garden, then it's not going to happen.
I'm really feeling that. I I personally have the best of intentions to compost, and I have started to compost a lot more recently, but even just get out into the garden and learn to love it, and the more you interact with the garden, I think the more you do love being in it. But there is definitely some block in me that's just like, I'll be sitting on the couch going, I'd love to get out in the garden more, looking at my garden, and then I don't.
You need some more rewards. So at the moment, our fruit trees are just burdened with fruit. There's nothing beats going out in the morning. I think I'll have some blueberries on my breakfast. Oh, look, these apples are going really well. Oh, gee, apricots are ready. Do you think we should pick them now? And then you bring them in, you eat them, and you think, that's what all the blood, sweat and tears is all about.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Mary, you learnt about transition towns a while ago.
Yeah.
How did you find out about it, and what made you attracted to the idea?
Well, I retired from teaching, and I was looking for something interesting to do. And what I discovered was that the city of Whitehorse, where I lived at the time, was running what they called a Sustainability Ambassador program, which was run by Swinburne. It was free, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went along and I did the training with that and got the certificate. And but because I did that, it opened up a whole lot of other avenues, and then I started hearing about transition towns. This was about 2007, I think I did that. Then Whitehorse said, oh, would we like to maybe try and make ourselves a transition town? So I joined the committee that was looking at that. And another thing that was very popular at that time was a thing called Sustainability Street. And I just keep thinking of retro suburbia when I think about that.
David Holmgren's idea about retro suburbia.
Yeah, about, making your street, even just your own street, could be the sustainable little hub in your town. Even if nobody else is doing much, you could make your own street like that. So that was really, really interesting. And I must say that when I was looking to move from Melbourne, one of the biggest ticked boxes for Castlemaine was that it was a transition town, or it was undergoing that sort of process. And I've been trained by people from Castlemaine, and I just thought, I think that's the place I want to go. So
that's interesting.
It involved me moving from Melbourne up to here as well for that reason.
So transition towns brought you here. That's great.
Exactly.
And since you've been here, you've volunteered and become a committee member at MASG. What do you see happening at MASG and around town that reflects the transition towns ethos?
Well, it's evolved quite a bit. It's a very old sustainability group, actually, in the country. I think originally it was doing quite different things. It was very, very focused on energy, renewable energy, which is why they were involved in the wind, trying to get a wind farm happening and all those sorts of things.
And a solar farm as well, I believe, at one point.
Yeah, solar farm, all those sorts of things. And then as all things change, everything's in flux. And so by the time I joined, those projects had not been viable. And suddenly there was this shift in the environment that was, because there had been quite an uptake in renewables, that wasn't quite the focus, but the waste thing came in as a really big focus. And I think since in the time that I've been at MASG, it's been mostly about waste, and that includes the biodigester, which is the project that's being negotiated with Don and Colaban Water and the council, which would be a massive waste project.
It's also an energy project though too, isn't it?
Yes,
so
yes.
it ticks two boxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
And it's part of that closed loop idea as well, for Don especially.
So what it is people can put organic products into it and it creates energy, and compost them at the same time, and we get a product at the other end that can go back out onto farmland.
Yes.
It's a really nice concept, actually.
It's very good. And it's hopefully enable a big company like Don, which is such a big employer in the town, to stay viable and to keep doing what it does.
And reduce their energy bill
Yeah.
and their heating bill. And
particularly heat. They use a lot of heat in the process.
And I'm imagining, I'm not sure, I might be wrong, but I'm imagining Don doesn't currently purchase 100% green power.
No. And their energy bill is astounding.
Yeah.
As a household, you can't believe the amount they pay
Yeah.
for their energy to run that plant. So
Yeah.
anything that would help them would help us
Exactly.
as well.
Yeah.
What's good about these stories is the long-term nature of things, because the sustainability group, when I was more involved in 2008, did a project that involved Don, which was Western Foods then, I think, and they tried to link up the hospital and the foundry to make a precinct where energy and resources was shared. And MASG got CSIRO involved in a study. And there was some early but significant work done on the technologies that were involved with that. And including, for example, the first time that we were, as the public, able to see power core data, and we could actually see what energy was being used by Castlemaine as a whole town.
Yeah.
And those sorts of statistics and things that accountants and scientists can help us with are so important, because before then we were saying, well, let's put more solar panels on the roofs. This was before virtually anyone had solar on their own roofs. But no one really knew what the scale of our energy use was as a town. And it was actually possible to find that out, and it was possible to see that, as you'd expect, some of the big machines are switched on at night time, because if the foundry or Don switched on something big in the daytime, they could sort of trip the whole town, blow the system. So there was a lot of common sense things in place, but it was good for that to be researched.
And also places like the hospital and Don have refrigeration and air conditioning running 24/7.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is all going to feed into this sort of data. We've got a lot more now. Is going to feed into the zero net emissions project that the council and MASG and lots of other people are embarking on. Also, just go back to the waste. Since I've been with MASG, we've sweated some of the small stuff as well, like, the boomerang bags. We've auspiced a lot of local groups that have got great ideas and terrific teams that just run with the idea.
And the Repair Cafe.
Repair Cafe. And, of course, originally we did get all the recycling of the light bulbs and the
batteries
all those things, batteries and all that was a MASG initiative. And, of course, which is great. And this is very transition town. It's then just got a life of its own, and it's been run by other people, and it's taken over, which is what it is, because the one thing about transition is it's a bottom-up, not a top-down process, isn't it?
Yeah. And Castlemaine interests me. It drew me a bit like Mary was saying. I was first living here in the 90s, then I went away, but I was drawn back to Castlemaine. I think it's a place where people consistently experiment, test things out, and a lot of those things do work, and they get taken up both here and elsewhere. And I'm curious what makes it that kind of place, because it's also sometimes frustrating, because a lot of people here want to move on to the next new thing all the time.
Before the other thing's actually been finished.
Yeah. And I'm to some extent, I'm one of those people. And it's great that we have those people. But I think it's really important to set Castlemaine in the global context, because Totnes in the south of England is a similar size. It's got a similar history of the last couple of 100 years, where it had an agricultural history, then it had an industrial history. Both agriculture and industry faded away. Both places. I mean, I go back to southwest of England, and 300-400 years ago, the land was the living was very rural. But that land was gradually taken away and enclosed by a few wealthy people. So our history, and what Rob Hopkins writes about this, what's not so far back in our genetics is this desire to somehow connect with the land. And it actually, I think that applies to anyone, anywhere in the world. And when I teach permaculture in big cities, one of the great things that is driving people there is to somehow have some connection with the land, even if you're living in a concrete box.
Absolutely.
So there are towns in North America, there are towns in Europe, there are towns especially in these more westernized OECD countries, where there are these hothouses or experimental zones. And the Global Lives Conference that was here almost 5 years ago, Rob Hopkins spoke to that by Skype, and he listed sort of 12 or maybe 20 factors that make a transition town, or he listed the ones that Totnes were doing. Castlemaine was also doing about 75% of those.
Yeah, right.
And back in 2008, we did have a transition group here, but we never got to register on the global list of transition towns.
Even though we're doing much of the things.
We're doing much of it.
So
we still could. We could still register. The form is there on the web. You just have to submit some information. Maybe we should.
Yeah.
Maybe as a result of today, some people would like to do that. I'd love it if we did.
So can you tell me a little bit about what the things are that he was recognising that would make a transition town? And also maybe from there you could talk about how towns like Newstead perhaps, or with their renewable Newstead movement, or Castlemaine are achieving those goals.
In a principle level, it's about dispersed systems, not centralised systems. So with our energy, our food, our housing, our community systems, the more they're dispersed and localised, the better. And 100 years ago, a lot of Australian country towns worked in a really much more autonomous way. So a town would have its water supply sorted out locally. It would have some of its food supply sorted out locally. Its healthcare would mostly be organised locally. I'm not saying that was perfect, but there is actually now a big interest in going back to those systems. So, for example, the electricity supply system, it no longer wants to send power from Gippsland to the Mallee when there's all this sun shining in the Mallee. So why, or even to Newstead. So any town like Newstead or Castlemaine or Witchyproof can easily generate its own electricity locally.
And I think this is a really key point to my mind about what's happening politically around climate change and the climate emergency, is that too few people, like the mining magnates, have had too much power over this system which is powering the whole of Australia, and they don't want to let go of it. And they're threatened by the idea of local areas having control of their own energy sources, like Hepburn with their wind turbines is a community-owned electricity source. And our world is so reliant on electricity now. It'll be very difficult to conceive of going without it. And
there's no need to go without it.
Yeah.
We just need to organise it in a different way.
But this idea of localising the power source and localising ownership is I think a really key part of what's happening in Australia, especially around Adani and coal and all of that stuff.
So that dispersed model was central to transition thinking when it first came around. It was building on not just permaculture initiatives, but a whole bunch of other experiments really that were being done since the 1970s. The 1970s, we had the first great oil crisis, 1973, when petrol prices went up by 4 times almost overnight. Now imagine what fuss there'd be now if petrol price doubled, let alone goes up 4 times. But so you can imagine the kind of shake-up that was to a country's economy in Australia or America, which had become, since the Second War, become totally accepting of fuel not being an issue. So we've now had 50 years of sort of getting to think about and adapt to fuel not being cheap and easy. But it seems like humans, and possibly some parts of the world worse than others, we do seem to be a bit slow to face the realities of the need to make a transition.
It's interesting to me. I've been driving for around 20 years, and in that time, I feel like the fuel prices have roughly doubled. It used to be like 60 cents or 70 cents a litre. And when it hit the $1 mark, everyone was panicking. But it hasn't stopped us driving. We all just adjust our budgets and our habits, and we still drive. So,
it's actually been remarkably stable these last 10 years, because around 2008 there was a bit of an oil crisis. That was when fuel went from about $1 to $1.50, and it's actually now for 10 years it's stayed up, never really gone beyond $1.50, but that that will change. But it's actually a tribute to the big system. It shows how competent the big system is at drip feeding us this feeling that everything is okay. But when you look behind the scenes, or when you look under the water, there's more and more chaos going on to keep change in our economy at what's considered an acceptable sort of drip feed of change, and protecting us from the bigger changes and you know, this last 6 to 12 months has been a big shake-up for people, of course, and I think it brings us back to the psychology of things, because not just the fires, but even before the big summer of fires, then the things about climate change in the media, the increased visibility of street level protest, especially
the
through
student protests,
So all of those things are getting more people. There's an awakening or a reawakening for some of us older folks about just how things do need to be addressed more actively.
And it's this whole notion of change. You know, we're surrounded by change, but humans just seem to like to think, we like to kid ourselves that things are stable, but they're in constant flux. And some things are slow, so we get used to them, and we don't like sudden changes and things like that. But I've been recently reading some quite interesting philosophy and talking about the blockers to change, especially people in power. But it seems to be the thought amongst many people, philosophers particularly, that this whole notion of rational discourse, it just doesn't work. It can work once you get people on side, then they will look at the facts and the science and all that sort of thing, and then that helps them to make adjustments to their thinking. But it seems that what seems to work the best, and this certainly fits in with all we've been talking about, is what they call relational discourse. So it's developing relationships with people, finding a connection, working from that base to get change, rather than, why don't you believe the science? You know, the science is here. Why can't you believe it, and why don't you act on it? Find another way in, and relational discourse seems to be the way that seems to prove to be a bit more successful in getting people to change attitudes.
I think that's a really important point, because in this world of internet arguing, we see so often people just hammering their point, and it just actually raises people's hackles. They're not going to respond well to being told that they're a bad person. So there's got to be a better way of changing people's minds. And I do know that a lot of people, like, no matter how much you present them the solid evidence of your argument, if they're feeling attacked, they're just going to shut down. They're not going to take it in, and they're going to feel like you're biased one way or another. So I think that's a really important point in terms of how we manage. If we're talking about transitioning away from oil, our reliance on fossil fuels, and changing so much of what is now habitual human behaviour. We've been taught it by our parents, even our grandparents had these things. So it feels embedded in our culture. But cultures have changed. I mean, 100 years ago, we didn't have washing machines or,
a whole bunch of things.
A whole bunch of things. Most people didn't even have not electric cars. I'd love it if everyone had electric cars. Most people didn't have cars 100 years ago. So I think change we've seen, when I think about my grandmother, who was born in 1914, and she lived to she lived to 92. I can't do that maths right now. She saw a tremendous change. She lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the introduction of all of these convenience technologies, so things that made our lives safer and easier. And we're not saying that we want to lose all of those conveniences, but it's an interesting idea that she saw that much change. We can see that much change as well. And we are seeing that much change. We're seeing renewable energies come in, and hopefully electric vehicles will come in. And Transition Towns is all about helping people through that, isn't it?
Yeah, and transition puts a lot of focus on storytelling, on including imagining you're in the future and telling the story of how you've got there, because it's so important that we're not coming from this place of fear. I mean, it's easy and I include myself, to get wrapped up in feeling frightened about the current situation. But we don't need to give up a whole bunch of things. But we do need to do things quite differently to get the comfortable, satisfying life that all of us are interested in. And that art and culture and storytelling has been part of Transition's approach to help people engage with this, so that this is a different way, I suppose, of saying what Mary was saying, that just presenting the simple, direct sort of science or logic of things isn't the way for everyone to handle this change. For me, until around the turn of this century, until about 20 years ago, the word alternative was a put down.
A slur.
But now, for the last 10 to 20 years, the alternatives are proven and tested. And we're proving and testing them all the time, whether it's a Hepburn Wind or Newstead showing how you can easily enough sort of step off the main grid and actually every day still go and switch on the light switch or switch on the kettle and not experience any different in your own home.
If you are interested in any of the books, articles or websites mentioned in the show, you can find links to them in the episode description at saltgrass.podbean.com. I am talking to Ian Lillington and Mary Blain about the ideas involved with Transition Towns, which was developed just over 10 years ago. And already it seems that the ideas have evolved, which I think is suitable for this time that we're living through, which is a time of rapid change, and we have to have rapid change to come out of this without catastrophic climate change in the near future. So, Ian, what are some of the things that you've been thinking about in terms of our local region and how transition towns can evolve?
You've mentioned the word rapid there, and the transition people in Britain have just relaunched with the phrase rapid transition. So the great minds are thinking alike. In a general level, as we've said, transition's about rethinking our approaches, and permaculture is about redesigning our approaches. So they go hand in hand. What that means locally is we've already got a lot of good initiatives. I'd love to see more people involved, because one of my concerns as a community worker over years is that energy tends to flow from one place to another. We've got a limited number of people who will be active at any one time. So about 12 years ago, we had something called Permablitz, where you could have your back garden made over and get some veggies planted.
I had one of them.
Yeah. But then along came Growing Abundance, and they did great work with harvesting food and processing it and so on. But a lot of the Permablitz people became Growing Abundance people, and Permablitz died off and Growing Abundance died up. Then
grew up.
Yes, that's right. So then another related project comes along. And although new people and new faces and new energy comes in, and we've seen a steady increase, for example, in community gardens and in people being out there in doing environmental related work, I'm interested in ways that we can involve more people, because there really is something for everyone.
Yeah.
If you're energy focused, there's the biodigestion or the solar. If you're agriculture focused, there's a whole bunch of ways to grow food, sell food. If you're into retailing and great shopping, there's all kinds of ways to make those products available. So I think that we need to keep on talking with each other about what is already going on, including how a lot of businesses are based entirely on that. So the workspace we're in now, there's dozens of businesses here, and there's these other shared workspaces.
So in context, Main FM is located in the old hospital in Castlemaine, and it's been taken over by a group called Workspace, and they facilitate small enterprises and give them the chance to have some rooms at a low cost to build up their business. I think there's a time limit on that, but it's a really good initiative. And there are, as you said, multiple sort of co-working facilitated sort of spaces around Castlemaine. But also share resources, I think, which is one of the key factors. So there might be computer hubs where people can share things, and people don't have to have a printer each and a computer each and internet each. They can use these workspaces and lessen some of those impacts.
And so there is no one starting point, but there are many, and that's a good thing. But the Mount Alexandra Sustainability Group is a great starting point. It's a public organisation, it's a membership organisation, it does its own projects, and it also points you to other related organisations and activities. And I know soon you're going to cover more of the upcoming conference for the end of March, which is the Local Lives Global Matters. And that put Castlemaine on the international map in 2015 when that conference last happened here.
And I believe that conference was the launching point for the group that you've been involved in for some years now called Localising Leanganuk. That came out of that conference, didn't it?
Yes, yeah. The concept of localising is another word for transition, really. The word transition doesn't appeal to some people. It's a bit too general, or it's used in healthcare, or it's used in education. Localising was an attempt to make it more clear about what those activities
what that means,
are.
what that transition is towards, because a transition could be towards anything, really.
That's right. Yeah. So I'd come back to what I was saying earlier, that Castlemaine is an experimental town. And the Shire is an experimental area. People come here to test things out. There's a lot going on. It's not always obvious, but I really encourage people to find out more about what is going on and get involved and contribute in some way.
It's very much a can-do town. It's something that I really noticed when we first moved up here, how very easy it was to form friendship groups, to join things, whether it's things like U3A, which is an enormous group providing fantastic service to all sorts of people. There is an atmosphere that no idea is that crazy, and there's probably someone who'll come along and listen to it or listen to you, and it's very nurturing in many ways, that aspect, because you don't sit with your lip buttoned up because you think you've got this crazy idea and no one will be interested. And it doesn't have to be crazy, but people are very willing and open, I find, in Castlemaine. And maybe that's something, maybe it's developed over many years, I don't know, or whether it's what it is, what's in the water here. But it's certainly something that makes it easier to get involved and have a go at something. The blocks aren't there, the blockages aren't there in the same way that they might be in some other places. I've been in community houses in Melbourne suburbs and things like that, and they offer really good services and all sorts of things like that, but nothing very exciting really happens, and you don't get that feeling here at all.
Yep.
So,
Ian, you've had some thoughts about because I know the Transition Towns model has changed its name to accommodate the idea that it can move into any size human environment. And what were your thoughts about what it would take for, like, the ideas in Newstead may not apply to Castlemaine because the town's 10 times bigger?
I think that a sense of scale or proportion is really important. How you meet your basic needs in a town of, say, 1,000 people is different to what happens with 10,000. In very simplistic terms, Newstead is about 1,000 people. If you combine Campbell's Creek, Chewton and Castlemaine, it's about 10,000 people, so it happens to be 10 times bigger. Bendigo is a little bit more than 10 times bigger again. And if you imagine yourself on the main street of Newstead or the main street of Castlemaine or the middle of Bendigo, you're in very different environments. But each of those needs these sustainability responses. Some can, and they are being directed by government, or they're being directed by financial incentives, and that's all fine. But how we respond as a community it's really up to you to work out what you can do with your community. And starting at the street level is an excellent thing to do. Getting to know your neighbours is one of the basics of this. You won't all be great mates with all of your neighbours, but at least knowing who they are, what their names are, makes life more pleasant. And in terms of like response to a fire or other emergency, it also makes life safer. So, Mary mentioned before, transition is starting at the grassroots and starting in your local neighbourhood. And then working out how that relates to, the facilities. We've got great facilities. We have underused community centres. Don't misunderstand me. There's amazing community work going on, but over the decades, councils and governments have built us some great community facilities. The community centre near me is probably standing empty about 90% of the time. The 10% it's used is wonderful, but what about the other 90%? There's massive opportunities we have here.
And what do you see, this is to either of you, what do you see needs to happen still in this region, say in Castlemaine? What needs to happen for us to fully transition?
That's a big question. I mean, there is the notion of drawdown, which is a hub that could be created here.
We've spoken about that on the show before. In the
Okay.
first episode, Dean explained the concepts of the drawdown hub. There's a list of 100 just in that book and more emerging all the time of ideas that can draw carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's not just about reducing fuels, and we desperately need to do that, but we also can draw carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, so that's something that Castlemaine could get a hold of and do something about. It's almost limitless, and I think my feeling is because of the anxiety and the worry that people have had recently and how things have come to a real head.
With the fires.
Yeah, that lots more things are going to suddenly come up and be doable.
Because people will be seeking ways to get involved
Absolutely.
and make a difference.
Yes, yeah. I think there's a momentum there, and it covers everything from, our economy here, as well as the built environment, transport. I think transport's something that's going to really have to lift in Castlemaine in terms of what we offer for electric car vehicles, for better bike lanes and things like that. There's just so much that can be done, and we're small enough to be able to do it.
I also think we need to assemble physically more often. I think the old idea of a town assembly is important. The Sustainable Living Festival coming up in Melbourne soon is having 4 public assemblies on 4 different themes. And this is about getting out of the social media sphere, getting away from your screen, because some of those people who seem nasty online are probably actually quite nice.
It's true.
And in the old days, we did physically come together more, and I'm sure we're going to see more of that.
And I think when you present a view that someone else disagrees with, if you're actually face-to-face with a warm, breathing human being, you present it differently. You use different words.
Mount Alexander Shire did an excellent community consultation in 2007, 2008, which led to a plan called MAP 2020, which was a plan for now, where we are. And it was excellent in the sense that the consultants brought together a really good cross-section of people. So there were very different views around the tables where we sat. The sad thing about that was we came up with about 120 great ideas, and there was almost no way to enact most of those ideas. So issues like how Forest Street in the middle of Castlemaine is redeveloped, issues about the swimming pool, issues about recreational facilities, which came along as a major problem a few years later, they were already being canvassed. Because folk around town know those things. We know those are issues. And I think if we sat together around tables in the town hall more often and discussed that as kind of a public assembly, a town assembly, we might make some better progress. As it is, things tend to come up as a problem, and then someone has to scramble to solve the problem.
I felt encouraged by the recent day. It was a long day, when the council was debating whether they would declare this Shire a climate emergency. And I thought the very wide number of presentations that were made, that the councillors sat very dutifully and I think very conscientiously through a lot of presentations before they made their decision. So there was no one in town who really could honestly say, and you could make written submissions as well, there was really no one who could say,
no one asked me.
Yeah, I couldn't get... No one listened to me, no one. And
Yeah.
I thought they did a really good job.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think having town meetings is a great idea, and if they were well facilitated, that would be brilliant. What else do you think could really shift things around here?
Well, since the 90s, I've been talking to people around here about the town getting more clearly sustainable in certain aspects. So, for example, our water supply still is a problem in terms of we're part of a big system. There's a requirement for that water to meet certain standards, which means a whole bunch of chlorine's pumped into it. We could do better with our local water system. In the late 2000s, when we actually did have a serious drought, we had a small group called Water is Life Mount Alexander, which spells Wilma. So the Wilma group actually met with Colaban. We talked about how more water could be recycled locally, so that irrigation was coming from sort of secondary water, and that more rainwater could be caught for our primary needs. But technically it can be done. It needs money spending. and a lot of money is being spent, but the big system spends our money in a way that doesn't actually make us more resilient.
No.
So there are ways that we can still, there's an openness to have those conversations still. At a more practical level, things like the permaculture courses that we put on, and the Community House puts on a whole bunch of practical workshops, U3A puts on workshops, where individuals can learn how to, say, have the better fruit in their gardens, how to prepare for fruit fly, how to have your own water system set up so that you can use mains water when you need to, and you can use rainwater when you need to. You can have both systems in your own garden.
And even using grey water perhaps safely, those sort of
that's right.
things.
So those practical things are available. Community House, Castlemaine Community House is stepping up year by year. Since it's got its new home, it's got that great sort of sense of permanence. It's got a community garden at the back. It's offering a wider range of courses. It's got a community kitchen which is getting used more often to process the food that's being grown locally. There are all these seedlings. I see our community as having a lot of seedlings, and people need to continue to nurture those seedlings, whether it's in the area of food or water or health or energy or transport and a whole bunch of other things. Also, I went to a short workshop back in September where a local Indigenous man had been to a major conference on Indigenous burning methods. And those conferences have generally been run in Northern Australia, and the next one this year is back up in North Queensland, but the one last year was on the River Murray, or the Dongala. They are starting to work even with local CFAs on doing cool burning, like genuinely cool burning, which doesn't burn off all the nutrients and kill things. It actually simply increases the fire protection.
And creates biochar, I understand, which is really beneficial.
Done at the right time and it actually comes down to people. It needs a lot of people on the ground who know what they're doing. So there are quite sophisticated ways of managing our bush. It includes a lot of Indigenous knowledge. It's happening locally. We're going to hear more of it. Dipping the toe in the water is not quite the right analogy, but last year was just the beginnings with the national conference here, and with a lot of people being inspired by that. Over and over, there are these examples of things going on that most of us don't know all of them, but keeping on sharing about these things, focusing on the solutions is...
And I think that's the benefit of the grassroots sort of movement, is that you're not relying on approval from the government or funding or any of that. You're just making it happen in your small town. And if your small town happens to be able to give that blueprint of what was successful to you to another town, then it spreads and it amplifies. And we've seen that in so many different areas. Now we've run out of time, so we'll have to wrap up. Thanks so much, Ian and Mary, for joining me and talking about transition towns.
Thank you, Ali.
Salt of the earth. Salt. Grassroots. Salt of the earth people. Grassroots change.
Saltgrass. Listen to all episodes of Turning the Goldfields Green on saltgrass.podbean.com. It should be noted that the statements and opinions of myself and the people I interview are not the official positions held by either Main FM or the Mount Alexander Sustainability Group. We welcome feedback and responses to the ideas expressed on the show. If you would like to respond to something discussed on the program, please email us at saltgrasspodcast@gmail.com. Please be aware that if you do email us, we may read your email on the show and we may identify you by first name. If you do not want this, please say so in your email. This program was made possible with support from the Community Broadcasting Foundation. Find out more at cbf.org.au.